wonder what you've been told about Jesus' invitation, that he loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, that if you pray a certain prayer, you will go to heaven when you die, that if you commit to following him, you won't have any more problems in your life. I don't know what you've been told, but if you're like most, it was abbreviated or completely misrepresented. The real invitation is aggressive, it's bold, and it takes a healthy dose of God's power coupled with human effort. But it's also for now, not later. Character transformation, not behaviour modification. Jesus invites you to attune your character to his, to possess a heart and life like his. Nobody is saying you can earn it. It'll take God's grace. Nobody is saying it'll be easy. It'll take hard work. But what if you really could attune your character to his, and in doing so, discover a whole new way of being human? If your life feels unmanageable, Jesus thinks he can help.
So we started a series 2 weeks ago called Attuned, and really what we began to explore, we started that week by asking this question of, like, what is Jesus' invitation? What is his agenda? What does he hope to accomplish? And it occurred to me this week that question has the potential of sounding very self-absorbed and even arrogant, because we stand on the shoulders of 2,000 years of church history and multiple great churches and great leaders and great conversations. And so that's not the heart at all. It's not this very arrogant, like we've got it right, everyone else has it wrong heart at all. Where it's coming from is a place of going, wait a minute, there's 2,000 years. We could have picked up a lot of ideas along the way that maybe deviate from what Jesus was really about. And it felt like the perfect time to begin a conversation like that because on Easter we gather to celebrate the resurrection, and that we should. For those of us that believe that Jesus is who he says that he is, that he's more than just a good teacher, but that he's God and Savior and Lord and leader, the resurrection is incredibly important. And yet what we began to suggest that week is that maybe in its importance and in our desire to reflect upon its importance, we've made it the whole point. And that oftentimes if you ask people, what is Jesus' invitation, what's his agenda, what's the win for him, it's boiled down into, well, if you believe in him, you go to heaven when you die. And it was that week where we began to ask these questions of, wait a minute, like where does that come from? And it certainly doesn't come from him. So what is his message? And really the heart behind that week was to say that this conversation is about growing our confidence in Jesus, not just in what he did. In growing our confidence in his leadership and his ability to lead us through life. We even called that week vampire theology because we recognize that if we're not careful, we find Jesus to be incredibly valuable and relevant and helpful as it pertains to physical death. But when it comes to navigating life and the decisions that we make and work and school and our friendships and marriage and relationships, we find him rather dated and irrelevant. And so we kind of wanted to push against that. Really close that week by saying, do you believe that Jesus can give you the kind of character that no matter what else goes on, you'll be okay? And that lifts right off the page from his longest recorded sermon, where he ends it by not by saying, okay, so here's the big deal, you guys. If you, because anybody who communicates know, like the last thing said is extraordinarily important. And he concludes it by saying, hey, listen, if you trust me, it'll be the equivalent of like being a wise builder. And if you don't, it won't. And that has everything to do with the types of people that we are and become and our ability to withstand the things life throws at us. Last week, then, we talked about the kingdom of God, and I know that sounds incredibly theological and completely irrelevant, and if you're not quite churched, you go, kingdom of God, like, so is that part in our history where Christians killed Muslims and they were fighting over holy ground? And It sounds like that, but it's actually much simpler. The Bible opens by God saying, you're mine, you're an image bearer, you're a VP, you're an assistant, you're a manager, here's some influence, here's some power, here's some authority. Now use it. And the biblical story in its essence is that all of us, we were given a kingdom. You have one, you have influence. And we said, we're not going to do it with God's character, we're going to do it with ours. We're not going to trust God's leadership and we don't want him to be a part of our kingdom. We just want to do our own thing. And so Jesus' invitation into the kingdom of God, which incidentally is what he invites us into throughout his teaching, is an invitation to say, hey, let me infiltrate your space. Let me be present with you and let me help you reign and rule over those areas where you have influence and control and leadership. This morning, we're going to pivot really from one question again, and it's this question of, do you believe that obeying Jesus is really possible? As you can kind of see, we're kind of jumping into the deep end of the pool. But I think it's an important question. Like, do you think that it was even his intention that you do the things that he said to do? That you become who he says to become, that you handle things like anger and lust and resources the way he says to handle them. Like, do you believe that obeying him is even possible? And in keeping with the masters, you think Tiger Woods can do it today? What is it about him that so endears us to him? I don't know. I really hope the guy wins. I think mostly because I want to say I lived during Tiger Woods' dominant area. But it struck me in keeping with golf that there's a range in answer to this question. Like, do you think that you can really obey Jesus? And it, just like anything, the range has extremes. There's the very confident yes at one extreme. And then at the other extreme, there's the equally confident no. But not just no, like hell no. When I first suggested this idea, Caleb just curled up in a ball in the corner of the conference room and he was laughing, and it was then that it occurred to me that there's more than one four-letter word, and so that's where we went with two letters to signify which one we're talking about. There's also the not really. There's the some of the time. There's kind of. And if you garden, any of you guys garden, I've got some devices for you when we're done here this morning. I would love for you to take them and raise beans on them. And then there's the most of the time. Where are you at? We talked in the first week, like we all have opinions. Forming opinions is central to what it means to be human. Like if you lead anything, you know that that's part of the downside of leading anything, is everyone has the ability to quickly form an opinion. And we all form opinions about Jesus. And here's what I think is particularly important this morning. You wouldn't... You should answer it. That's good. Tell them you're busy with Jesus. Or with some goofball that's not even talking about Jesus. I think it's an important question, and you wouldn't be, and certainly there's people in the world that don't have an opinion in response to that question. I don't think you're one of them. That doesn't mean that I assume that you follow him. I realize that some of you, many of you perhaps don't. But you, by the nature of your being here, you're demonstrating you have an opinion to the question. And I think understanding what your opinion to the question is really important. Like how you engage that question, what you've concluded about that question, it will say a lot about your spiritual journey and your goals for your spiritual journey. It hit me this week and I think you'll probably find this to be the case with you as well, that over the course of my life, my opinion on this question has changed rather dramatically. I was raised by a Catholic mom and more or less a Lutheran dad, and I can't remember the day when I didn't believe that Jesus existed. I can't remember the day where I didn't believe that Jesus died on the cross and that if I believed in him, I'd go to heaven when I die. I can't remember a day when I didn't believe that there was a God who loved me and cared about me and was available to me to pray. And on both sides of my family, extended are people who loved God, and I'm grateful for that. Now, what I didn't, so that was very ingrained in me. What I didn't realize until real recently was that over the course of my growing up years, my opinion here changed. I don't know what degree it's even possible to think about this as a little kid, but by the time I reached 17, I was hanging out with this family and spending a lot of time with them, and they attended this great church in Billings. And in looking back, over the course of the next couple years, like my junior year and those first few strategic months after graduating, my opinion on this question, I slowly began to move in this direction on the range. And I'm grateful. And again, I don't think that's a criticism of my past or anything like that. I think, here's a crazy thing. First service, so a gal comes up to me and she said, Adam, we went to CCD and stuff together in the Catholic Church when we were kids. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And she said, no, I moved in high school, but like we went to St. Anthony's together. Weird. I guess when you have a microphone, you can say stuff that doesn't matter. But I can see that I moved in this direction. And by the time I was 19 years old, some people had really helped me begin to understand that Jesus invites you to obey him. And my opinion became very passionate over here. In fact, in my early 20s, I would say that if this represents the extreme, I wasn't just like here, I was over here. And my yes wasn't like, yeah. It was like, yeah, you better. And if you don't, like you're going to hell. And some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. You can swing so far over here where you become the salvation police, you know? Like you single-handedly are fully qualified to discern everyone's eternal status. You don't have to raise your hand if you've ever been there, but you wouldn't be laughing if you hadn't. So just pay attention if the person next to you is laughing and then just call him a Pharisee. I remembered this week a conversation I had with a coworker who must have been so arrogant as a young 20-something on staff at this church. And there was this guy who had led a church, and he was 15 years older than me, and he used to be a high school pastor, and that's what I was at the time. And he was in my office, and I can't remember why he was in my office, but we began to talk about Jesus and the church and students and my goal for students. And I just said to him, again, I don't know how we got here because I didn't just go around volunteering it, but this is what I thought. I said, George, what you need to understand is, my opinion is that if there's 100 kids at youth group tomorrow night, I think about only 10 of them know the Lord. And that was based upon this, yes, you can obey him, and if you don't, you're not his. And he went very graciously, yeah, I don't agree. And he walked away. In my early 20s then, I can see that I started to move then this way. And I don't entirely understand why. I think some of it's just life, because this is a lot easier when you're 19 and you don't know anybody who have hard decisions to make. And it's pretty easy to be idealistic. When I was leading the 20-something crew, I remember saying to people, often these young college students who loved the Lord and were really zealous, and they had this type of theology. And I used to say to them, that's not going to work in the real world. Your theology won't work. And they'd be like, what are you talking about? I was like, it just won't work. When you sit across the table from people who are really going through it in their marriage, when you sit across the table from people who have been raised in these incredibly hurtful environments, when you sit across from real people who look you in the eye and say they love God and are doing things, you're going to find it very difficult to disqualify them because it's messy. And I'd like to think that's part of what happened as I moved back in this direction, and certain people who influenced me, like Brennan Manning and Rob Bell and Brian McLaren, and then going to George Fox. And I think prior to re-engaging the divine conspiracy here maybe 6 months ago, I think I was kind of over here. And it wasn't that I didn't take it seriously, it was that I just didn't necessarily think it was the goal. And my question, where are you at? Because you have an opinion, and you also have an arrow. You got your arrow? So there's a two-part contest to this. What I'm going to invite you to do is just shoot the arrow with where you are, or shoot Kyle Ball. It's whichever one you would like to do. So shoot whatever sign aligns with where you're at, and I'm going to give you about a moment to do that. You can do that now. It's kind of a difficult task, and they're not very good arrows. Some ideas are a lot better when you're sitting in a conference room. Where are you at? Some of you undoubtedly are over here, and I think you can be in this no, not just no, but hell no category for a variety of reasons. You can be here because of incredible shame. Maybe you're here because you feel like you've failed, and you've tried. You were a part of youth group. You grew up in the church. I don't know. You started following Jesus a couple years ago, and you had high hopes for your ability to change and be transformed, and you're just kind of discouraged. You can also be here, especially if you're someone that doesn't have confidence in Jesus. And if we're all honest, a lot of people lack confidence in Jesus because of the way people like me act when we're in public. You can believe hell no because you've seen too many people who believe something and they're not any different. And you haven't even necessarily studied it theologically. You've just come to the conclusion Christians might miraculously get to go somewhere else because of what they believe, but there's no corresponding relationship between what they believe and how they behave. And maybe that's where you're at. And you may have had some very valid experiences to reinforce that. You could be here just because you frankly don't feel equipped and you don't know. You can be here for, or probably more like in this range, for also very theological reasons. I think I've bumped up against this at different times in my journey, where what we conclude is it's just not the point. It's not the goal. And in some ways it's not, but what we develop is a theology, if we're not careful, that says, hey, people are all broken. They're all as broken as people can get, as broken can get. And I adopt that myself. But if we're not careful, we come to this conclusion that God is just this big teddy bear God, and we say things like this, well, God just wants you to be happy. That's all. Like, God just loves you. He just wants you to be happy. And that's one of those statements that can be true or extraordinarily false depending upon where it's coming from, but that just may be where you're at. You can also be here. I think this is what religion looks like. I think this is what religiosity looks like. Because it's yes on Sunday morning, but it's no desire on Friday night. It's yes with regards to my quiet times, but it's like, it's completely irrelevant when it comes to sexuality. It's yes on this issue, no on this issue. It's yes these days of the week, no on these days of the weeks. Like you can be here because, and we call this, technically it's called dualism. I mean, it's like you can listen to Johnny Cash on the boat on the lake, but if you listen to him in church, that church is evil. That's kind of the tension there. You can also be here for some very positive reasons. Like you're new to following Jesus. You're new to following Jesus again. And this can come from a very humble, like, yeah, I think about half the time I've got a decent shot of doing the right thing. And that's fantastic, especially if it reflects growth. Maybe you're here. And of course, some of you are. And maybe this is a reflection of years of hard work and devotion and God's grace. And like you just go like, yeah, I feel like I'm doing pretty well. And of course, you can be here too, and you can be here in a very gracious, like, yeah, yes. And you can also be here in a very judgmental, as I described myself. But I think it's really important, no matter where you are, that you at least figure out where it is. I think that's helpful. In fact, in many ways, I think your ability to progress with Jesus is frozen until you figure out where you're at here, and that's without even supposing that there's a right answer to the question. In my first few years of youth ministry, I had the privilege of leading these mission trips to Tijuana, where we would fill vans full of kids and middle schoolers and high schoolers and drive to Tijuana, Mexico. And there was this great organization called YUGO down there. I don't remember what it stood for. I'm not good with acronyms, but it was this great organization, and they called it a compound, literally on the outskirts of Tijuana. And so, you'd sleep there and you'd eat there, and they would bring in a speaker and musician, and that kind of was your morning and evening. And actually, they had a terraced hillside, and so everybody'd bring tents, and you really wanted to be in the tent where the zipper was fully intact, because they had tarantulas, and the tarantulas came in during the day, and they'd come get in your sleeping bag, and so you didn't dare get in your sleeping bag without checking. Anybody itchy at all right now? My son came up to me the other night and said, "Dad, there's mosquitoes in my room." It was like 3 a.m. There's mosquitoes in my room. No, there's not. They can't be mosquitoes in your room. It's the middle of winter. Well, Teresa says, they must be spiders. I said, they must be spiders. She's like, you're an idiot. You just said that. He said, Dad, there's spiders in my bedroom. And I was like, why are we talking about this at 3 a.m? Anyway, so it was a great experience. They would always bring in a speaker. They would always bring in a musician. And this one year, the musician, he was literally a one-man band, and he was straight out of the early 80s. He had this hair that was well past his belt, but it wasn't like mullet style. He had no bangs. I mean, every hair on his head was the same length, and so he would just like flop it over the top of his head, like Michael Bolton, only his hair was as straight as mine. And one of the girls, she was one of, every group has that girl. She was so funny. She started calling him Mufasa, like the lion, because he had this big flowing mane. music was so bad. He had this keyboard, but it was nothing like that. It was like $49 from Walmart, but he could program like cymbals and drums and the xylophone and the trumpet, and he'd like pre-program all this stuff, and then he'd sit up there and lead us through music. And even then, I was a music snob, and even though I don't have any musical skill, I just have opinions. That's what I do. And it was so bad. And, it was one of those like, am I supposed to be singing? Am I supposed to be laughing? And this, at one point, he invited us to get involved. And so he said, hey, anybody? And he held up a tambourine, like a real live, not a programmed one, a real live tambourine. He said, does anybody want to come play the tambourine? And this kid, who's not a kid anymore, but he was then, and he's actually going to be here in a couple months to teach. His name was Alex. And I mean, if I have zero musical ability, his is -50. And the difference is he raises his hand when people say, do you want to help? And I don't. And so the guy hands him a tambourine, and he says, hey, just play this with the music, And here's how he played it. Like, there was no rhythm. For some reason, he thought his goal was to shake that thing as fast as he could for as long as he could. And he would literally take breaks. So he'd put it in his left arm, and he'd like stretch out his arm, and then he'd go. So horrible. Still, when he's here, we're going to greet him. We're going to bring him onto the stage with tambourines. They also would bring in this speaker, and it was the same speaker both times. Of course, this is a missionary organization, and they've got a bunch of students there. And his message was always this. If God doesn't tell you not, so there's lots of double negatives there. I'm sorry, I'm only an English minor. If God doesn't tell you not to be a foreign missionary, then it's sin if you don't. That was his message to students. In other words, the only way you could justify not going overseas and handing out, and doing good work and talking to people about Jesus and doing whatever it is missionaries do, the only way you could justify not doing that is if God has explicitly told you he doesn't want you to. And I remember going like, wow, I'm pretty new to the scene, but that's wild. And we'd sit there and I'd have these conversations. And again, I don't think I was very gracious in these conversations, but I did saddle up next to him. I think actually one of the guys who's helped me lead the trip, he must have been sick of me complaining. He's like, you need to talk to him. And so I saddled up next to him at a meal. I don't know if it was dinner or lunch. And basically my question was like, what the, like this, it's really what I was asking. And he said, Adam, here's the deal. If I don't say it like that, no students are ever going to go overseas. But if I do say it like that, a few of them might. And then he introduced me to a word. He said, it's called a hyperbole, Adam, which means an exaggeration. And I remember thinking, it's called manipulation is what it is. Now here's my question. Is that the way you treat Jesus' invitation? Like, do you treat it as something that's so extraordinarily impossible that he couldn't possibly mean what he says? Like, yeah. Thanks, Jesus, and we appreciate the pat on the head. We appreciate heaven. We appreciate the grace. But you couldn't possibly expect me to handle my anger and my sexuality and my resources and to treat my neighbor and to treat my enemies the way you're telling me to. Like, no, that's way too radical. Is that your approach? And again, I'm not even necessarily right now tipping my hand and saying it's wrong. I just think it's important to know if that's the way you're treating his invitation. There was a guy, Shane Claiborne. He was a very popular author years ago. He lives this remarkable life. He lives communally in Philadelphia. One of the best books you could ever read is a book called The Irresistible Revolution, and he's very funny, and he lives very simply. And I remember him talking, I believe it's in that book, he said, I used to take it as a compliment when someone called me a freak. Like, oh, you're so amazing. He said, I used to take that as a compliment. What I've come to realize, though, is it's not a compliment alone. It does two things. It compliments me, but it gives them permission to not do what I do. Because by calling me a freak, then what they're doing is they're saying, like, I couldn't do what you do, and so you do that, and good job, we need our priests, and I'll come be a normal person. Is that your approach? Listen, I think, and now we're going to jump into the Sermon on the Mount, I think what Jesus' message was not only that it's possible, but it's possible for everyone. In fact, we talk a lot, if you've been raised in the church or if you've been around church, we talk a lot about the cost of discipleship. I think you could conclude from Jesus' message that following him is actually easier, because there's a cost to non-discipleship too, if you think about it. I think the reason why there were so many people surrounding him is because it wasn't that they felt guilty, it was that they felt hopeful. And that he portrayed an invitation that actually made it feel like doable, not that they just had to come pay their toll with regards to their guilt. In Matthew chapter 5, we're going to pick up in the Sermon on the Mount. And if you haven't been with us, we've been working, this is kind of a rare season where we're actually going to work through a section of Scripture, section by section. And if you're not doing that's okay. There's podcasts. And also, I just got to tell you, we're going to skip a couple parts. If you're not reading through the Divine Conspiracy, that's okay too. How are you doing in the Divine Conspiracy, though, those of you that are doing it? Doing all right? Just the 9 o'clock people are reading it? I heard a guy this week say that reading Dallas Willard is like having a giant bucket of stupid dropped in your lap. Thought that was fair. We're going to skip to verse 17 because it's a pretty catalytic section. Jesus says this, "Do not think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Like, don't think I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, to fulfill them. Now, here's the good news. Those people experience what you experience. And as Jesus is sitting on this hill, that's their culture. They're sitting, he's sitting, they're standing. These hundreds, probably thousands of people are listening to him teach, and the word is that he's amazing, and his yoke is awesome, and his teaching is hopeful, and they're thinking what I think you think in these situations, and that is, okay, so is he going to tell us that everything else we've ever learned is wrong? That we've completely wasted our time, that we've completely wasted our energy, that grandma was wrong, and mom was wrong, and the priest was wrong, and everything I've ever been told before is garbage, throw it out, burn it in the fire. That's what Jesus is addressing here. In fact, we go through this. It's hilarious. One of the people on staff, I've had these interactions before, but someone else had one last week where someone came up to them and said, "Hey, I'm not supposed to be here." And you're like, okay, like, what does that mean? Jail? I mean, where are you supposed to be? And they said, "I'm Catholic." And it's one of my favorite conversations. Oh, good news, we're all on the same team. But this is what he's dealing with. Like, are you telling me that if I follow you, everything else I've ever learned, garbage? And he's going, no. Don't think that I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. I haven't. Not at all. And he continues, "For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, nor not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished." In other words, like what they've said to do, what the scriptures say to do, you should do it. It's a pretty good idea. It works. It's right. What they're saying to do, do it. Now, some of you are going, wait a minute. I've always been told that what Jesus is saying in this verse is that what the law and the prophets are useful for is to point us to the cross. Some people believe that. I don't. I think it does an injustice to the Jewish people. If you read Paul, what he begins to say is, listen, the law was useful. It was useful for some things. It tells you what to do. So don't think that all of a sudden everything it says about anger, now some of the ceremonial stuff, of course. But he's going, hey, it's good. You should do it. "Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches others accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven." So again, he's just reiterating this same conversation, like, hey, it's not garbage. You don't have to burn it. What they said to do is pretty helpful. Like, they're saying, do it. Over here, do it. And then in verse 20 is where, he's like a good boxer, set up. And now here's where the whole thing and the whole Sermon on the Mount hinges on this verse. "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." And that's where they went like, whoa, like he just took a shot at the president. Like, unless you're righteous, so you're telling us to do what they say, but you're saying that unless our righteousness is better than the very best in our culture, then we don't arrive. Yep. This, if you're a Catholic person, is like saying, hey, listen, unless your righteousness is better than that of Pope Benedict, you don't stand a chance. And you go like, well, then I don't stand a chance. Like, it's over. This is like me saying to you, I don't know who it is you respect spiritually. I don't know who it is that's poured into you, who's mentored you, what pastor you've admired, what book, what author. But unless your righteousness is better than theirs, it's game over. And they would be going, wait a minute. And where this goes from here is what Jesus goes on. Here's the catch point, because the question becomes, okay, so what did the Pharisees have so wrong? Like, what was so broken? And it boils down to this, and we'll look at it in Matthew 23 in just a second. The Pharisees taught that goodness involves doing the right thing. Jesus taught that the goal involves becoming the right kind of person from whom doing the right thing flows naturally. See, for the Pharisees, it was all about alignment. It was all about religion. It was all about looking and playing the part. It was all about outward observance. And depending upon how often you did that, depended upon how good of a Jew you were. If you were someone that could do it 7 days a week, 24/7, then you were over here in this camp because you could conform your behavior. And if you were someone that could only do it a little bit, then you were in this camp. And if you were someone who couldn't do it at all, then you were over here. For the Pharisees, it was all about what you did. And Jesus comes on the scene. And what was radical about his teaching wasn't that all of a sudden that he says, hey, listen, morality's out the window. It doesn't matter what you do whatever you want. Character doesn't count. What Jesus says is, listen, trying to do it doesn't work. Like, I want to give you the type of heart from whom doing the right thing flows naturally. Listen to him in Matthew 23. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. Now, pause there. Before we all go like, yeah, you hypocrites. Well, that's all of us, right? There's a tension here for all of us. You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin. Outwardly, you do the right thing, but you've neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. See, outwardly, you got it nailed, but inwardly, you're all off. And then he says this, you should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. See, this is don't suppose that I've come to abolish the law and the prophets. Like, you should do what they say to do. I'm just telling you that the way to get there isn't the way that you've been told. Do it. It's a good thing. And then he concludes, you blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. See, there's the tension. You strain out the little thing, like the behavior, what you do, that's the easy part. The big part, the having your heart right, the being the right kind of person, that's the hard part, and that's the part you're neglecting. See, what Jesus' message is consistently, and I just invite you, I dare you, I challenge you, just go read the book of Matthew and see if this doesn't leap off the page. What Jesus' message is listen, if you just try to do the right things, you'll fail, and people will hate you because you'll be so miserable and so mean and so unkind. If you just try to do the right thing, you'll fail. It won't work. See, for Jesus, spiritual formation, that's a pretty churchy word, but spiritual formation is not about behavior modification. It's about character transformation. Jesus is going, hey, hold on. This continuum, it's important. But it doesn't just mean how hard do you try, how hard are you trying to work. I think Jesus would say, hey, great question, but this isn't a question that deals with effort. It isn't a question of like, how dedicated are you to the cause? It's a question of like, how many layers of your heart are you willing to allow Jesus to deal with? Because you can be a great Christian and be really, really angry. Why? Well, because you can just believe stuff and never let God touch and deal with your heart. Jesus invites you into a type of spirituality that isn't all that concerned with what you do, because he knows that if he can influence who you are, then what you do will take care of itself. And we elevate our conversations about morality and all these things, and I realize sometimes politics requires that we do, but we elevate them and we talk about behaviors. And Jesus goes, well, yeah, there's always going to be people that are preoccupied with that, but it doesn't really matter. We're just managing behaviors. That's not the game I play. That's not what I'm interested in. Listen, if you're a parent, you know this. Do you lay awake at night wondering what career your kid's going to have and trying to mold and shape them into a particular occupation? Do you lay at night, in bed at night, even wondering and worrying about how much money they're going to make, where they're going to live? Or when you think about who they're going to marry, I mean, do you think in terms of what part of the country they're from or what job they're going to have? No, what you know almost intuitively is if they can just arrive at 20-something and be a person of character, they'll be just fine. And if they're a person of character, they will naturally flow towards Jesus because he's the best at it. He's the one that makes it possible in so many ways. And when you think about who they're going to marry, you just go like, man, if they marry someone without character, that's going to be rough. If they marry someone with character, that'll be pretty awesome. That's God's heart for you, and it's not a shaming thing. It's not you're a failure thing. It's an invitation. It's a, hey, listen, there's benefits for you too to believing in me. And the benefits are, I could change who you are. I could change the way you approach things. Here's my challenge to you this week. My challenge to you is, whether you're churched or unchurched, you follow Jesus or not, to read Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 21 through the end. At least once. I think it would be beneficial if you did it Monday through Friday. If you don't have a Bible, stop by Guest Central. They would love to give you one. But read Matthew 5, starting in verse 21, starting in the section right after the one that we just finished. And just ask yourself this question. Would I want that kind of character? Would I want to be that kind of person? And here's what's going to happen. You're going to read what he says about anger, and you're going to read what he says about lust, and you're going to read what he says about words, and you're going to think he's giving you superior rules. It's not what he's doing. What he's doing is illustrating how a person that follows him and is influenced by him handles their anger and handles their words and handles their sexuality. That's the issue. It's not rules. It's an illustration of character. So read that and ask yourself, would it be great to be a person of that kind of character? And if you conclude yes, then here's the next step in that challenge. I don't know of a way of asking God to make us a person of character that doesn't involve practicing some kind of silence and solitude. Now listen, that's not like sitting cross-legged in the middle of the street. You don't have to hum. It doesn't have to be weird. It involves pushing your phone aside for 15 minutes. I still think it's best to start your day this way, but we could debate that. It involves having maybe something to write with and maybe your Bible and maybe even a good book, but it involves creating some space where you shut up and God has an opportunity to talk. And I dare you, do that for 5 days and have God not put his arm around your shoulder and start going, hey, remember when you talked to them this way? There's a heart thing here. Let's deal with that. Remember when this happened? I dare you. And I hope it's not a condemning feeling for you. And if it is, I think that's your past. I don't think that's God. I hope it's a God that goes, sweet. That's what I do is I change people. At that point, you're praying David's prayer. God, search me. Know my heart. Know my anxious ways. See if there's anything broken inside of me and point it out, will you? And work on it. The righteousness of the Pharisees, the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, it was all about behavior, and it just skipped the heart. And the reason Jesus says, hey, you better be better than them, is he's saying to be in my kingdom, to be the kind of people I'm inviting you to be, to operate in your kingdom the way I'm inviting you to operate in it. It requires that you let me work on your heart. And what we're going to talk about in the coming weeks is more about that. I don't want to pray to end this morning. I'd actually like to pronounce a benediction over you, and I realize that can be a little weird, but if you're not churched, will you just stand? And I just want to pray a prayer over you, and we'll go. So may you narrate church. May you discover a Jesus who wants to change who you are, not just what you do. May you be less focused on the outward stuff and more on the inward stuff. And may you have the courage to invite him to start pointing out the heart stuff and then to get the help you need accordingly. May you discover his invitation, not just to go somewhere later, but to be someone now. Sure love you guys. Have a great week.
For more information on Narrate Church, visit www.narratechurch.org or download the mobile app, now available for iPhone and Android.